Welcome to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica Crashi, and I'm really excited about today's episode. So, today is a solo show. I'm going to be chatting with y'all about deity work, and specifically, we're going to be talking about what I've learned in my time being a pagan witch, what I've learned from the gods about the nature of deity work and the nature of the gods. This is obviously my opinion, my experience. You may not resonate with it. However, the things that I wanted to share today are reflections that I've had for a long time. And a lot of the times, these reflections are things that I hear other people talking about, like either just thematically or like I'll agree with people and be like, oh yeah, I've experienced that as well. Especially the last couple weeks, talking to all the amazing people I've been interviewing in interviews that haven't come out yet. I've really been like reflecting a lot on my deity work relationships. I also cleaned out, well, I didn't really clean it out, but I was like going through one of my most recent magical journals. I was kind of like flipping through one of my magical journals. I had finished it, like I'd filled up the journal. And so I was just kind of like going back and flipping through certain things just to see, like, oh, what did I write about this? Or what tarot cards was I getting, around this time? I like to reflect on my magical journals, depending on the information that I'm looking for. I think that it's really helpful to like go back and read and kind of see where you were at, what you were experiencing, what kinds of signs and interactions you were having with your deities that you write about. And so I was looking through one of my most recent magical journals and I was reflecting especially about some conversations that I had with Hades about the nature of deity work. He's a deity that I find that I go to a lot. He's the deity that I have the closest relationship with. So I find that whenever I have a question like about deity work, like about how to be a better pagan or how to practice deity work in a way that works better for me or is better for the gods, right? Just like anytime I have a question about that, he's kind of my go-to of the deities that I work with to ask about that. And so he gave me a lot of advice recently that I was reading in this magical journal that I was so happy with. Like I just thought it was so interesting and fascinating and I really wanted to share it. So the first basically one that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through like 5 things that I learned from the gods, about the gods from the gods, essentially about the nature of deity work. And the first one I'm going to go through is directly inspired by a recent conversation that I had with Hades. So let's just hop right into it. So the first one, the first thing that I've learned from the gods about deity work is that deity work is like largely for us, like largely for us mortals, humans. And the way that Hades described this to me, because obviously the gods love the fact that we work with them and you know, worship them and build altars to them, right? But the way that he described it to me was like a student teacher kind of thing. If the gods are the teachers and we're the students, the point of a class is not for the teacher to have all the students agree with him and obey him and do all these things blindly. The goal for the teacher is to teach the student. And if for whatever reason the student isn't learning, it could have to do with what the student is doing or how the student is maybe managing their time or something, and that's a consideration. I think if you enroll in a class, the idea is that you want to show up, you want to take the class, you want to, be disciplined, right? So that's part of it. But also the teacher would want to work with the student to figure out what, how they could be working better together, what they can try, and this idea of like the teacher just wanting the student to understand and wanting to connect with the student in a way that they're going to really resonate with it long term. That is what the gods want us to do. And every god has a little bit of a different personality. And so they have a different way that that's going to be accomplished. Since this was a message from Hades, this may, I think that it's fairly applicable across the board, but this kind of reflects on his nature as being a mentor, as having this very kind of kingly, fatherly mentor energy, which he already has, right? He's very calm. He's very like unmovable, like I feel like you can't really say anything that he'll be shocked about, like he's not a very reactive god, unless like I guess unless you really push him, right? But I've never experienced him as like reactive or angry or having any of, or even like solemn or anything. It feels more kind and like he wants to sit with you and witness your experience with you, and if you're ready and if you're willing, give you advice on how to navigate that, right? That's what I've experienced, and that's what so many people who have communicated with that work with Hades have experienced. So this particular point, might be extra potent coming from Hades, because I think it kind of touches on sort of his personal way that he views maybe his devotees, but I think it can be said across the board. So next time you are feeling like you feel like you're not doing enough in your deity work relationship, or you're almost feeling like you don't want to go to the altar because of whatever reason, because you feel like you have been neglecting it, because you feel like your deity is like whatever you're kind of thinking about in the relationship. Sometimes these can be projections, sometimes this can be our own inner critic coming through, or imposter syndrome that maybe we hold in other areas of our life coming through. Sometimes this can be other types of relationship dynamics that we have with other people that we've learned that can come through in deity work contexts. And so next time you're feeling any of that in relation to your deity work relationship, and you're like, what can I do? How can I give to this deity? Think about it as a student-teacher relationship. What would your mentor want from you, right? They would want you to be understanding the information and the lessons that you're meaning to learn. They want you to be doing well. They want you to be disciplined, not for anybody else, but for your own benefit. They want you to truly enjoy the experience of learning, of coming to the altar, of being engaged in deity work, right? They don't want you to like show, and they know that, I'm sure sometimes, it's like, I'm thinking back to when I'm in college. There were some days where I was like, I can't fucking wait to learn. I'm like a big learner. Like I love college. I almost want to go to grad school just to learn. I'm such a crazy person. Like I don't know. Well, I don't think that's that abnormal. I think you might agree with me. And I know a lot of like, I feel like a lot of people who are into the occult are kind of like readers and students and people who really want to learn and who are interested in, knowledge, which is, I think, why we're all kind of drawn to the occult. So I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that. But anyway, what I was saying about that is like, there was definitely some days in college where for whatever reason I wasn't feeling it, or I didn't do my homework and I felt like shit. I was like, oh my gosh, like, what are they going to think? Or like, what does this say about me as a student, right? And that can happen in a deity work context, right? Let's say you've been ignoring the message that your deity's been giving you. Sometimes that just happens, and it's like a divine timing thing. Like you're meant to act on those signs when at a certain time. But for whatever reason, let's say you're holding shame or some type of negative feeling around how you're showing up, how you're coming to class, how you're going to the altar, how you're talking to the deity, that sort of thing. You could think about like a ritual as like your thesis or something, right? Like, oh my god, I didn't do this ritual, I didn't work on this thesis. And just ask yourself, like, how would your teacher want you to show up, right? There are going to be some days where they totally get why you're coming to the altar with that feeling, and they're going to want to talk about it with you, right? Like, I don't really remember a situation where I went up to my teacher and was like, I don't want to be here, let's talk about it. But I think this is where the analogy can kind of split. And we get to have this relationship with our deities. This is why they're so intimate and not just a student teacher relationship. We get to have this relationship with our deities where we talk about everything with them. And so you might as well talk about the issues that you're experiencing and any problems that you have. And this actually leads into the next one that I was going to talk about. So perfect segue. The next thing that I learned about the gods, through the gods, right, that I learned about deity work through the gods, is that they really want to help even if we don't ask. So what I mean by this is that when we're communicating with our deities, communication is key. So when we're communicating with our deities, if we're describing something that's frustrating us, even if we don't ask them to help, they're probably going to want to help you. If it's your patron or matron, if it's a deity that you have a long-term relationship with, now it really sounds like dating. Every time I talk about deity work, I'm like, it kind of sounds like dating. I don't know what to tell you. But it's a relationship. Even though it's a non-human relationship, it's still a relationship. So the same shit applies, right? And honestly, I think the relationship with your deities is such a mirror to your relationships with living people on earth. And they both kind of mirror each other. And I think that you can like deconstruct and learn so much about what's coming up for you as a potential issue in your real kind of material relationships with other people who are mortal entities. Sounds so weird. I'm making it weird. Okay. Let's go back. I think you can learn a lot, right, about all of your relationships from looking at your deity work relationships and vice versa. And I think that if you carry any types of, um, like just anything, like any previous issues or issues that you've had with other people, other relationships, those can sometimes carry into your deity work relationships. But regardless, anyway, the deities want to help you, right? Your gods want to help you. That's why they're working with you. Again, think of that like mentor relationship. If you tell a mentor of yours or a teacher, or even like somebody that you look up to, even if it's a friend, right? I'm having this experience. They're going to want to come in with some type of guidance or advice or assistance in some way. They're going to want to help you automatically, right? So that's the same with your deities. I think that we have a tendency to assume that our deities are like, because they're gods or whatever, we have to serve them or we have to get in their good graces. And I think a lot of that may come from previous religious conditioning. I think a lot of that, like it's funny. I was raised Catholic. I always say that I don't feel like I really retained a lot of like the Catholic dogma, because I was very like, I didn't believe it, and I really was never interested in Catholicism other than, like, saints. Like, that was my shit. I loved the saints, but I remember being in church, and they would recite, like, the Nicene Creed, "I believe in one God," and I forget. I honestly forget I shouldn't know the Nicene Creed to begin with. Like, it's just I'm a pagan. I don't need to recite the Nicene Creed, right? But, I remember listening to it being like, no, I don't believe in any of this. Like, what is this? And I was even a young child and being like, I don't believe in any of this. Like, yikes. So I always say that I feel like I didn't like retain a lot of the Catholic dogma, but I still did through the way my family structure worked, the way that my family members and my caregivers retained that shame and guilt and the Catholic guilt, right? The country that I live in, right, is I live in America. The whole country, especially in the last, well, I think it's always kind of been a thing. I feel like the religious right has always been a silent kind of force in America, especially like post 1950s, where it was really kind of poignant, and then there, were certain waves of this throughout the sort of like zeitgeist, right, of American society. Now we see that coming up again, and so I feel like even though I don't consider myself somebody who held a lot of religious dogma, I still did and do for a variety of reasons and a variety of like, external environmental forces, so I have to deconstruct that and recognize that as a pagan deity, or yeah, I'm not a pagan, well, Maybe. No, I'm kidding. As a pagan witch, that's what I'm trying to say. As a pagan witch, working with pagan deity, it doesn't work like that. I don't have to see the gods as these forces that I need to get into the good graces of, or who are going to judge me, or who, are not going to like me unless I act a certain way, right? Like that's not what we do here, every god has a different personality. Every god has a different has different things that are sort of a part of their cult and their historical worship, and their mythology and that sort of thing. And that can definitely differ from deity to deity, which I think is the beautiful thing about paganism. But where I'm at right now in my deity relationships, like, that doesn't need to be a part of it. And even if my deities really do want to push me towards something and guide me a certain way, and they want me, to have a certain level of discipline, and they want me to, maybe encourage me to do certain things, there's not going to be like this, if you don't do this, you're going to hell kind of talk, right? Like, that's not a part of it at all. And I think that sometimes we have to just take some extra time to allow our brain to detach from those types of ideologies that they can really just stick in there, And I think that there are people in the pagan community who can um who can, like, what's the word, like, perpetuate those kinds of ideas. And I don't think that there's anything, like, it's not their fault necessarily. I think that there are absolutely certain types of ancient religious behaviors that you could see, like, you could look at that and you could go, oh yeah, there's a little bit of like a conditional attitude that maybe certain groups of people in the ancient world had with certain deities. But I think if you just like look at it as a whole, or maybe even just remember about the fact that what we know about ancient religions and ancient spiritual beliefs is through the lens of Christianity and Abrahamic religions, it's almost like impossible to separate our brains from looking at it with that tone. You know what I mean? I talk to my husband about this a lot because he's very well read in a lot of like religious studies stuff. We're both really interested in that sort of thing. He is a little bit more interested in it from the perspective of Christianity and Abrahamic religions. He was raised Greek Orthodox. He doesn't have, he's like a total Sagittarius Pisces. Like, he doesn't have like a set religious belief. He's like, I'm just excited about learning about all religions. He doesn't really have like a religion that he like ascribes to necessarily, but he obviously respects my religious beliefs, etc. But we always talk about that, about how, it's so hard to understand paganism, and it's so hard to understand pagan theology. And even using the word religion with pagan theology is really kind of a point of contention with a lot of scholars, when we think at these practices, right? We think about the cults of the ancient world. It's hard to really even call it a religion, I think that the word religion is so associated with like organized religion, and so tied into like the Abrahamic religions, and how they operate compared to the sort of decentralized pagan spiritual beliefs and practitioners of the ancient world. So anyway, I went on kind of a tangent. That's par for the course here, so nobody was surprised. But back to the topic. What we were saying before, right? They want to help, and this is for us. We have to redefine, every pagan has to sort of redefine why they're in these relationships and what it's doing for you and what you're getting out of it. And because of that, right, this was all to say that you are allowed to think of you're allowed to do whatever you want in paganism, really, but like, you can think about your deities in a more dynamic way that's not just the template of worshiper and like almighty God, right? You're allowed to have a different script, think about it differently, and interact with your deities differently. And your deities do want to help you. It's a mutual thing. They want to help you. They want to work with you. They want to be in relationship and in connection with you. That is what they want. Just think about the gods as wanting to connect with humans. If we think about the Olympian deities, or their children, or these, like Hades is technically not an Olympian deity, but he's sort of that era, of the Olympian era. He's sort of would be kind of considered a part of that broadly, right? So is Persephone. She's not an Olympian, but she's sort of that era of deity. Compared to the Titans, the Olympians were sort of created for humans in a way, right? They were sort of created in the age of humans. There's a lot of stories in Greek mythology about how humans ended up being a thing. And some of them are like in relation to the Titans creating humans. Some of them are like there's sort of a couple different origin stories, right? But in a way, the general attitude of the Olympians towards humans is one of synergy and assistance. The Titans, maybe not so, maybe not so much, but the Olympians, yes. And that's why they are a little bit more human-like. That's why they're a little bit more flawed. There's so much I could say about that, but and you might not be a Greek pagan, and that's totally fine, or you might not work with the Greek pantheon, but we kind of see this throughout all world mythology, where like there tends to be certain deities and certain classes of deities that are more interested in working with humans and assisting humans. And I think it says a lot about just how pagans viewed their gods, and how it is throughout every pagan culture so different than sort of how we've been conditioned to see God, living in a world that is so Christian and is so Abrahamic in general. Okay. I love it. Okay, so the next one is that deities are walking with us. We are kind of, well, I don't really want to say like we're taught this, but what tends to be the case about pagan deity, especially when we think about paganism versus Christianity, right? Or monotheism in general. Paganism is unique because there's sort of this belief that the gods are not omniscient. We can see this through so many different types of mythologies around certain gods deceiving others, certain gods, not being present to watch something. There is no omniscience happening with pagan deity. But I think that sometimes that can feel good at certain times, because you're just like, cool, thank God, like Zeus isn't watching me do this or whatever. So it can be really freeing, especially if that was something that kind of bothered you about maybe like a monotheistic religion. So it's a little policing, we're not a fan. But in paganism, that's not the case. However, pagan deities are still going to walk with you. I describe this in my own practice as like the more that you work with a certain deity, the more you start walking their path, the more tuned in you are to them, and the more you can bring them into your daily life. I find, just through my own experience and through talking to so many people, that the deities that we really care about and that we have a close relationship with almost act like spirit guides or some type of guardian, in the sense that they, even though they're not omniscient to everybody, they're going to want to pay attention to and walk with the devotees that they're deeply connected to. So you might have experiences with the deity where you feel their presence around you, that you feel them visiting you. Maybe you're telling them about a certain situation that you were in, and they almost seem like they know what you're talking about because maybe they witnessed it too, right? There have been so many situations where I've felt Hades' presence around me, and or I've maybe done an evocation and then I banished Hades, or I've told, gave him the license to depart, and I still feel his energy around me. And it's so fascinating. So I started to say at the ending of all of my rituals, Hades, I give you the license to depart and to go back to your abode, but stay with me, stay within my heart, like go wherever you want. Like you have a home in my heart, right? You can stay with me, you can walk with me. And so that's something that I recommend saying to your deities, really whenever you talk to them. Thank you for counseling me, thank you for talking to me, thank you for coming to my aid. Stay with me, stay in my heart. And that's a great way to start building up your psychic connection with deities as well, because if you immerse yourself in their energy, and there's many ways to do that, but if you immerse yourself in their energy for an extended period of time and want you to walk with them, or they want wait you want them to walk with you, they want you to walk with them, vice versa, right? Then you're going to start, like, really interesting things are going to start happening. I think I did a podcast episode about this in the past in season 1, but there's another phenomenon called like walking a deity's path, right? Where with, for my example with Hades, is Hades rules over certain things. There's certain parts of his being, his mythology, his archetypal essence, his story, his message that kind of like correlate to certain life events, certain patterns within life or within relationships, and certain lessons to learn. And so I noticed when I started walking Hades' path, when I became a devotee, when I started working with Hades, certain things would happen to me that maybe they happened to me my whole life and I was just already attuned to these patterns, but certain things started to happen where I really felt like, oh, I'm walking in Hades' shoes right now, certain things with like people, like whether it be people misunderstanding me, kind of that idea of like Hades sort of rules over misunderstanding and being scapegoated and black sheep kind of, situations, being ostracized, like that type of stuff, right? I feel like Hades has experienced that both by mortals and the gods. He sort of sequestered himself to the underworld, but he's also not just sequestered there himself, he's meant to be there. He has this destiny of being the king of the underworld. He's supposed to be there, right? It's his realm. So I also find that people that work with Hades, they tend to have certain life themes, like maybe careers that are really important to them, families that are really important to them, some major project, something that they feel like they have to work on and be around for and pour their energy into in a very scorpionic, intense kind of capacity. So that's another way that you can walk with a deity, is it's not just sort of about them literally like being with you and kind of guarding you and making sure that you're good. There's definitely that component, but it's also that you literally like walk in their energy. You experience the things that they experience, and it's this really fascinating thing that happens with pagans with their deities. And I kind of urge you to explore that and how that might be showing up in the relationships with your deities. How are you similar to them? How have you had experiences in your life, either before them or after you started working with them, that really highlighted something that they have been through or something that they teach? It's fascinating. This one's kind of similar, but it's that their energy can inhabit place or places. And this one I find is specifically probably really accurate to Hades for one reason. Hades he's a deity, right? He's a pagan god, but he also inhabits the realm of Hades. Like his energy, his name, I should say, right? Hades is the name of the realm, is the name of the underworld. So to some extent, Hades is a spirit of place as much as he's a god like any of the other, gods of his kind, we kind of see the Greek deities as deities who are maybe like have humanoid kind of um, ways of showing themselves, but a lot of them can shapeshift into animals. That's like a big thing in Greek mythology and in other mythologies as well. Hades, we never, well, there's a couple of stories that we could see him like potentially shapeshifting into other things, into like animals and things like that. I think the one that comes to mind is when Persephone is impregnated by a snake. Some people say it's Zeus, some people say it's Hades. It's a little ambiguous. This is like the conception of Zagreus. Um, but even so, even in that myth, right, it's a little bit up to certain scholarly you know, like work to figure out potentially which deity that was. But for Hades, right, we see him more as shape shifting or transforming into the literal spirit of place, kind of over an animal or something else, right? Which is unique. What other deity of the Greek pantheon is like shape shifting to be a whole place? You know, even Poseidon, he's just kind of like under the sea. I don't know. He's just like around the ocean. Oceanus is the ocean. Hades is literally the realm, right? So he's a unique deity, um, because he almost takes on like a Titan quality to the way that he operates, but because Titans are sort of the spirits of place, but he's not a Titan, so it's interesting. Anyway, I find this to be particularly true with Hades because he has a spirit of place energy to him. I find that sometimes I'll walk into rooms or graveyards or certain places, and I really feel the energy of Hades very distinctly. And I'm like, oh, Hades' energy is here. And I think a lot of the reason why that could be true is oftentimes these will be, yeah, like graveyards, places that are like liminal, places where the veil is a little bit thinner, or the underworld is a little bit more present, that thonic energy is a little bit more present. I felt his energy a lot in places that are like below sea level or like low to the ground or like underground, in caves and canyons and things like that. I felt Hades' energy. It sort of has that chthonic essence as well. Um, when I'm near his sacred plants, I feel his energy as well. So, it could just be sort of coming through in that capacity. And I think that can be true for any deity. I think, if you come across a place that reminds you, if you come across a beautiful grove that reminds you of Aphrodite, her energy might be present there, right? And vice versa. If you come across, a meadow of flowers, it might be, the Persephone's energy might be more present there. So I think that just makes sense as a whole. But I think if you've never experienced this and you don't work with Hades, that makes sense to me as well, because Hades isn't a spirit of place, he could very well more easily manifest with his energy kind of being inhabited in a space. Anyway, it's kind of interesting, but I'm sure you've experienced this and I'm sure you've felt this at some point. And it might be a little bit like the deities just kind of followed you there and walking with you there, and you feel almost like, oh my God, now we're here together. Sometimes I find that maybe Hades' energy wasn't at this place prior to me being there, but there was like this magical thing that happened when I entered this place that like I felt Hades' energy like meet me there. So that could be happening as well. But just honor when that happens, because I definitely, these are pagan deities. These are gods of the earth. And I really find that their energy can come through really almost like physically in the earthly realm, in the material realm. And that makes sense for what how they exist and what types of deities they are and that sort of thing. So the last one that I wanted to talk about is that sometimes deities will introduce us to other deities. This has happened to me multiple times, which is so fascinating. And I wonder if this has happened to you as well. But this is something that I've learned by talking to people and by having my own experiences, which are always so fascinating. Sometimes your gods and deities will just know that somebody else can help you. It's kind of like that student teacher thing again, where maybe there's a certain lesson that that teacher feels like they can't teach you. Maybe it's not their topic, it's not their subject. Maybe they feel like you need a different approach, a different energy. Maybe the teachers were talking after class about you for whatever reason. And that other teacher that hasn't worked with you is like, oh, I want to start teaching this person because they sound like they would be really open to this, or, I could really help them with this thing that they're dealing with. And so that analogy is what happens with deities. Again, I don't know exactly what the conversations are behind the scenes about the devotees or about us, but there's been so many instances where a deity has been like, hey, I want you to meet this deity. I want you to work with this deity. Let me introduce you. Sometimes this happened in rituals where I evoke Hades, I call in Hades, and I notice that there's another presence there that he's brought in with him. Sometimes it's been a little bit more like I get visited by a deity and I feel like Hades has sent them, or maybe they express that to me in some way, and I talk to Hades about it, and it's sort of like confirmed that, yeah, like Hades has sent this deity to me. It's so interesting and fascinating. This happened with Persephone. I remember asking Hades for a while, like for like the longest time, like, hey, when slash if will I ever have a relationship with Persephone? I went many, many years before really ever feeling a desire to work with Persephone. And also, every time I had worked with her in the past, I never felt like her energy was there. I always felt like I was just talking to like an empty room. And Hades always kind of gave me this answer of like, you just have to wait. You just have to see what happens. I think in the future you could work with Persephone, but we just have to see what happens. And that was sort of his answer for a very long time. And then there was this one day in the last like 2 years where I did a ritual and Persephone was there. And I was like, this is not just Hades. Like, this is somebody else here with me. Who the hell is here? And I was kind of annoyed. I was like, did I not cast a good enough circle? Like, what's going on? Like, I was sort of like, is that my problem? Is it my fault? Is this like an entity? Should I banish everybody? Like, what's going on? And then I did some divination. I tapped into the energy. I didn't feel like the energy was bad. I just, I really kind of I assessed the situation, you should say. And I pulled some cards and I kept getting the Queen of Wands, and in my playing card deck that I use with Hades, she's like the Queen of Clubs, and I have certain words that I write on the playing cards, and one of the words I wrote on the playing cards was Persephone, because I always associated the Queen of Clubs with Persephone because it's Aries energy, and Aries is associated with Persephone, like the zodiac sign, partially due to, that's when she comes out of the underworld, that's a springtime, that's her energy, that's her sign. So I was like, oh my God, this is freaking Persephone coming through, right? And I figured this out. And we talked in that initial ritual about why Persephone was coming through, why Hades brought her to me, why we needed to work together. And it was so fascinating. And I've heard that with a lot of other people. I've heard like, people who worked with Hades and then Hecate was brought in, or maybe they worked with Persephone and then Persephone introduced them to Hades. I feel like that's how a lot of people, when people come to me wanting to learn more about Hades, that tends to be the arc. It's like they're Persephone devotees and they want to learn about Hades, and they find my content and they're like, okay, let's learn about Hades. And for me, it was like the opposite, where it was like, I've started working with Persephone so recently, and I was like calling up all my Persephone devotee friends being like, you have to give me advice, we have to talk about Persephone. So it happens a lot. I've also seen this happen with deities who are, maybe they're just within the same pantheon, but they're not like husband and wife, or they're not like interacting with each other that much. I think it usually tends to be deities who are friends, or who are family, or who are connected in some way. Um, people that they would interact a lot, for example, like maybe Hades and Hermes would interact a lot because he's always come into the underworld to bring messages and souls to the underworld. Maybe, Hypnos and Hecate and Nyx and Thanatos and all the deities of the underworld might connect with Hades frequently, and there might be a little bit of that going on. But I think it can still happen with deities that don't interact as much. Like I could see, Apollo and Hades can, maybe they don't connect often, but I could see Hades being like, oh, this girl needs to work with Apollo. I'm going to call him up, or I'm going to, at the very least, tell you, hey, I think I'm going to give you a referral or something. It's like a therapist. It's like, I'm going to refer you to a specialist. Here's a specialist. It's so fascinating. And then sometimes what can happen too is like we start working with a deity and other deities of that pantheon, or sometimes not of that pantheon. I've had experiences where I started working with a deity and deities from other pantheons start hitting me up for whatever reason. And I'm like, what is happening here? What is going on? And so I think that and none of these things necessarily need to be explained, but I think that the way that makes sense to me as to why that happens is kind of like similar to how other deities or how other entities or ghosts or spirits can sometimes find you and come to you. I've had friends that are mediums where their clients start showing up psychically for me. And I will be like, who is this person? I had this situation recently, a couple of years ago, where I was talking to my friend who's a medium, and I was like, yeah, I had this really weird encounter with a spirit last night, and I told the spirit to leave and that, it wasn't welcome in my space. And she was like, oh my God, that's a spirit that I work with a lot. Like that's a spirit that comes to me a lot in mediumship. And it was just so fascinating. And so that can happen with deities too, where if a friend of yours works with a certain deity, you almost like get on their radar, right? Maybe that deity is literally like walking with that friend of yours or walking with somebody you know, and you interact with them. Maybe just by working with one deity, you're sort of lighting yourself up, you're almost becoming more perceivable to other types of deity, even not of that pantheon, right? There could be so many ways to look at that and to think about that. And so that happens a lot. And so if you find yourself like unable to contact deities, or you feel like it's really difficult for you to find deities, sometimes all it takes is just to start working with one of them, and then things start to happen. And I didn't put this on the list, but another thing that can happen a lot is when you go through some type of life shift, like let's say you graduate college or you get married or you start working in a new field or something, or you have a child, or a variety of things happen, you get into a new relationship, that can trigger like deities coming to you. Part of it is like they see you in a new way. They almost like see that you've gone through certain initiations and they're like, oh, she's ready to work on this now. I did not work with any feminine deity till I got married. And I don't say, like, I'm not saying that as a prescription for anybody else. I know so many people, like, I am the anomaly. I know so many people who worked with feminine deity, goddesses, etc., way before they ever got into a long-term relationship, or, even before they were like dating. But for me, for whatever reason, that's what my arc was. I could never connect with goddesses. It was so hard for me to connect with goddesses. I could only connect with the divine masculine, like almost in every way. I didn't even feel like I had any spirit guides that were like sort of a nocturnal, lunar feminine energy, right? Like I just never felt that way. I was like, I'm like, it's just me and the guys. I don't know. It was just so weird. And I didn't like necessarily want it. I was like, where are the goddesses? Like, I'm a pagan. I should be working with like all sorts of deities. And that was just for whatever reason, like what happened with my arc. And then when I got married, I felt like there were so many new deities contacting me. Like I got a present when I got married from a magical mentor. It was a statue of a deity that was associated with marriage. And I was like, oh, hi, like you literally came into my life in the form of a statue. I had people, friends of mine, being like, hey, I was channeling a message and this deity was coming through and they wanted me to give you a message. And I was like, that's so interesting. I had Persephone come through. So many things happened after I got married with feminine deity. And I feel like to this day, it's even like a developing situation. I feel like I'm like almost every month I feel like I'm like getting into contact with somebody, which was so not the case for so many years. And so, be mindful of that in terms of if you feel like you're not getting anywhere with your deity work practice or even with a topic in witchcraft, sometimes it's just a divine timing thing. Like for whatever reason, it's just not the right time and you just need to wait until it is, and there's nothing you can do. We as humans always want tasks. We want something to do. We want to be able to prove that it's our fault for whatever reason, and it's not. The point of a lot of magic and ritual and deity work is to initiate us into a new part of our life, to help with that transition, right? To help with the transition of being born and dying. That is like a lot of the reason why we do this work, to learn, to grow, to expand, to accomplish certain things, to use magic to work our fate and manifest, things that our soul really wants to do in this lifetime. There's so many things that magic can help us with, and a lot of it really has to do with growth and transition. And those aren't things that we can control like fully. We can obviously be somebody who interacts with those things. We have to do the growing. We have to, go through the initiation process. But sometimes you've done all the paperwork, you've done everything. You just have to wait for it to process. Like there's nothing left for you to do. And that's beautiful. And that's amazing, and that's when maybe other things in your life can start to become more important, right? And then eventually, like for me, I just let go of the desire to work with goddesses. I was like, all right, it's gonna happen when it happens, or maybe it never will, and I'm just gonna be a Hades girl forever. Which I still like, really, because for the majority of my pagan experience, I only worked with Hades. I still, really consider him like my primary deity in a way that I find is also very unique in the pagan world. I find that, like, I don't know. I do think that it's, it's maybe not totally uncommon, but I just find that so many people, whether they be colleagues or clients, have like lots of relationships with lots of gods. And for me, I do have like more casual relationships with, I would say like a handful of deities, but because for so long my only focus was Hades, I just feel like I have such a deep connection with him that it's he in my mind is still my primary no matter what, right? And I wonder if I'll always feel that way. And I think it also goes to, it maybe adds to my role with Hades, and how I feel in relation to him, and what I feel like my job is with him in this lifetime, and that sort of thing. And that's different from person to person as well. But anyway, my loves, that is what I have to say, what the gods have taught me about deity work. I also want to invite you to my recent workshop that I did on glamour magic. Glamour magic is one of the things that I, in the last couple of years, have used over and over and over again to kind of like manifest my different things in my life, including career stuff, social media, like you're watching this right now, probably because of some type of glamour magic that I worked. And I don't say that in like a way where I'm like, you're only watching this because of glamour magic. But the way that I work with glamour magic and use glamour magic is largely to attune myself with sort of my goals. That's how I work with it. Sometimes we just need to allow other people to see us in the way that we know we are deep down, but for whatever reason, like let's say you really want to become a doctor, let's say, right? And you are in med school, you're on your way to becoming a doctor, but maybe you don't feel like a doctor. Maybe you feel like other people around you don't see yourself that way. And in order for you to get a job, I don't know what the process is of getting a job as a doctor, by the way. It might not be like this at all, but because, you're stepping into this, it's kind of something that you're becoming. You want to make sure other people are perceiving you that way, and you yourself want to be perceived in that way. You're not a student anymore. You're a doctor. You're the real thing, right? Maybe you find that your clients, because you're young and you just got into this field, maybe they don't trust you as much. Maybe you feel like you want everybody to perceive you in the way that you are deep down, right? So that's what glamour magic can be really great for. It can be amazing at getting opportunities, aligning yourself to success. Let's say you feel like you've been getting some maybe one-off opportunities, but you haven't felt like any of it stuck. Glamour magic is a great way to do that because it shifts the way people view you. And a lot of the times over time, it can shift how you view yourself. It can make you more confident, and it can just make you come off, like I said, as that person that you're becoming and that you're stepping into. So I recently did a workshop called Opportunity Alchemy. You can watch the replay, and that's available to you right now. It's also available in the Stars Court tier of the Palace Coven. The Palace Coven is my monthly membership group. There's 3 tiers. The top tier is the Stars tier, and you get access to the Opportunity Alchemy class inside of the Stars tier, as well as so much other content. There's so much stuff going on all the time in the group. There's tons of live events every month. We always do a Q&A call where you can ask me questions. You can get my advice on your magical practice. We have spell recipes shared every month. We have a Discord server. There's so many things going on in the Palace Coven membership in general. So you can either purchase the Opportunity Alchemy class just alone, standalone, it's $55, or you can join the Stars Court tier and get access to that and so many other things. So take Opportunity Alchemy, especially if you're somebody who is wanting to learn more about glamour magic. You want to learn the principles about how glamour magic really works. That's my thing. When I teach magic, I want to teach you the principles, the logic, this sort of science behind it, right? The logic and the science behind the the phenomenon of glamour magic. And the reason why I do that is because I find that it's so much more, it sinks in so much better. It helps you really create mastery of it because you know the principles of it, you know sort of the occult underpinnings of why it works, and then you can use it and, like kind of tweak it and make it your own, which I think is really cool. And I always encourage my students to find their own way in magic and you know, learn through materials that really honor their own practice and their own way that they go about their magical journey. Because I want you to start developing your own voice in magic. That's like my goal. So basically the way that I teach is in regards to that and helps to foster that. So take Opportunity Alchemy or join the Palace Coven and come along for all of our events this month. Awesome, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Share this, like this. If you're, regardless of what platform you're on, I think you can, well, maybe not like podcast platforms, but give me a rating if you're on a podcast platform. Yeah, share this to your stories. I really appreciate your support and your listening to this podcast, and we will talk very soon. Bye.